Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot, welcoming you to the latest episode of the podcast, Running State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host at Running State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week we have a great conversation with Rob. I'm not going to say his last name right now, and you'll figure out why a little later. But he is the new CEO of the New York Roadrunners, who of course will be putting on the TCS New York City Marathon later this week.
Rob's been on the job for less than a year, since last January. And I've been, frankly, super impressed by his understanding of the emotional side of running and marathons, and by his great communication skills. But before we get to Rob, we want to talk about some of the biggest recent news stories in the running field. Amby, what's attracted your attention?
Well, since it's New York City Marathon weekend coming up, that's what I'm looking at. And the marathon did reveal a lot of its award winners in a press release this week. So we know now that the New York Roadrunners Hall of Fame is going to induct Dina Castor and Ernst Van Dyke, two people who have been runners in many New York City marathons and have a great history in the sport. Also, and I'm quite excited about this one because the award winner is a great friend of mine, the Baby Bikila Award for historical contributions is going to go to Patty Catalano, who, of course, in 1980 was the first American woman runner to break 2:30 in the marathon in New York City. And lastly, the George Hirsch Journalism Award. My gosh, that name sounds familiar. The George Hirsch Journalism Award is going to go to Aaron Strout, who has been making significant contributions, mostly in the print field, to running journalism for the last couple of decades, both at New York City and in Flagstaff, and really in covering the national and international scene. And so, George, what have you been thinking about?
Well. First off, Amby, you and I go way, way back with Patty Catalano Dillon, and I'm thrilled to tell our listeners that she's going to be our upcoming guest, our first guest after the New York City Marathon. And all I can tell all of you is hers is an unbelievable story. It is a story of despair and ups and downs and resilience that it could be the subject of a Hollywood movie. Let me tell you that. Amby, there's so many things I think about this with the New York City Marathon coming up, and, all that goes into it. I mean, it's a full year's work on the part of hundreds and hundreds of people. The moving parts are just extraordinary. And yet at the end of the day, there's a couple of things that no race director or his team or her team can have anything to do with. And one is the weather. It's out of your control. And the other is, and this happens a lot at the elite level, injuries in the sport. And we see that again here in New York. Our defending champion, Evans Chebet, who won Boston this year, who obviously was a major headliner, is out with injuries. And, what that's going to mean with Paris coming up, I don't know. But I was assuming, like everyone who follows this, that the Kenyan selectors to pick the Olympic team were clearly going to pick Eliud Kipchoge, Kelvin Kiptum, the new world record holder, and very likely Evans Chebet. And if they did, I think it'd be fair to say that would be the closest thing that marathon running has ever come to a dream team. And now with Evans out, maybe that opens the door for someone else. Who knows? I don't know the extent of his injury. But that's what I'm thinking about as we're coming up on the New York City Marathon.
And of course, we also know that if the Kenyan Olympic Committee or Athletics Committee has to go to pick number 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or pick number X, they've got still the next best thing to a dream team in their field at Paris. But no question, it's unbelievable that the Paris Olympics is coming up next summer. It was just 3 years ago since Tokyo, of course, and we're all getting very excited about every bit of it. Another thing I noticed this week is that New York Roadrunners released a list of its celebrity runners in the marathon this year, and it included TV folks and film folks and rock stars and others, most of whom I've never heard of and don't pay much attention to.
I remember when celebrities were people that were sort of household names. Now, who knows? They're TikTok influencers. They're not exactly on everybody's screen.
Well, maybe not on Amby and George's screen, but I understand TikTok does have some influence out there. But one runner caught my attention. And I do not know anything about this guy except that he is 6 feet 9 inches tall. And I've never met a 6'9" marathoner, so I'm excited by that. I also know that he has run ultra marathons this year, at least up to the 50K distance. His name is Zdeno Chara, and I'm sure I did not pronounce that correctly. He's a former great hockey player with the Boston Bruins, but I'm hoping I get to meet him at the New York City Marathon, get to shake his hands and say, congratulations on being so tall and still running 26 miles.
Let's keep our eye on him. And that's our view on the biggest running news that's come up in the last week or two.
This podcast is brought to you by MarathonHandbook.com and RunLongRunHealthy.com. Marathon Handbook is the world's leading marathon website with a special focus on trustworthy running information and free runner-tested training plans for all ability levels.
And Run Long, Run Healthy is Amby's weekly newsletter with the newest, most scientific, and most useful training advice for runners. He spends hours searching the internet so you can review the best new content in just minutes.
Now let's turn to this week's guest, Rob, the new CEO of the New York Roadrunners and hence the New York City Marathon. I'm not saying his full name right now because it's quite unique, and I want to hear it direct from him first.
Well, I actually know how to pronounce Rob's name because he and I have worked together a lot this last year. As you know, I stepped down as chairman of the board on June 30th, so I was part of the team that actually interviewed and hired Rob, and we've been working together and even continuing to now that I'm chairman emeritus and still on the board. And I've been tremendously impressed. I'll just add this, by the way, that Rob has stepped in and is leading this really large team of people at the New York Roadrunners. It's almost a year now, and I just can't say enough.
So, Rob, welcome to our podcast, Running State of the Sport. We're so pleased to have you with us.
Amby, George, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's great to speak to you, and just want to say it's been the thrill of a lifetime so far, serving in this role as CEO of New York Roadrunners. So I'm thrilled to be able to join you today.
Rob, I just can't resist asking you about your last name. It begins innocently enough with Simmel, which sounds like Simmel, but then it bends sideways like a soccer ball with Kjaer, and those are not normal English language combinations. So tell us how you pronounce the name and maybe a little of where it came from.
Yeah, it's definitely a tongue twister for folks, but it's so much easier than it looks. Simmelkjaer is how it's pronounced. So that all that KJ stuff is just CARE. So I always say it's like Obamacare. Simmelkjaer, it's like Obamacare, but the premiums are much more affordable. No, it's
I'll sign up.
No, it's a name that comes from Denmark. A part of my family was Danish. I don't speak a word of Danish. There's no one in my immediate family, but my great grandfather was from Denmark, and he emigrated from Denmark to at the time the Danish West Indies, which are now the U.S. Virgin Islands. So St. Croix used to be owned by Denmark, and the United States bought those islands in around 1920, something like that. And so my great grandfather was born on St. Croix, and he emigrated to Ellis Island with his mom. And our name is actually on the registry at Ellis Island as well. So that's where the name came from. I know that he must have been a very strong-willed guy, or he more like his mom, because he was a kid, to get through Ellis Island without that name being shortened or chopped into Sims or Simmel.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Clearly the strong will was something I come by honestly in my genetics, because he definitely, they had to fight that one out, I'm sure.
So, Rob, let me ask you, since January when you took over the organization, what have been the biggest and also the most surprising things that you've learned about the New York Roadrunners?
Yeah, thank you, George. The biggest isn't a surprise to me, but the biggest is just the passion of the community of runners that, New York Roadrunners kind of serves as the gatherer of. At the end of the day, what New York Roadrunners is, yes, we're a race organizer. Yes, we are, of course, the organizer of the TCS New York City Marathon. That's what we are most known for, and that's what we've got, tens of thousands of people coming to New York City on November 5th to do. But week in and week out, we're a convener of people who love to run. We bring people together in races or in lots of other settings, free running programs, things for, programs for youth. And it's all about the passion for running. That's what brings that community together. And I knew it was big, but I'd say it's blown me away in terms of how much passion there is in the community. And I mean New York, but I mean the global community of running for what it is that we do. And so that's really the lifeblood. And it's been amazing for me to see it from this vantage point. In terms of what surprised me, I would say just how much goes into putting these events on, and these races on. I mean, I know it's a big operation. I worked in events before when I was in my sports career at ESPN, NBC Sports. So I know a lot goes into it, but just how good the team at Roadrunners is that I have walked in and inherited in terms of knowing how to do this at the very highest level in the world. And every single thing that they think of, every scenario, every possibility of what could happen or might happen, they've seen it all. They've thought of everything. They've seen every sort of scenario play out when it comes to events, whether it's weather or, things that happen with runners from a medical point of view or whatever. They're just so dialed in that I think I've been blown away by how good the team is. And so I'm very, very happy to be in a position where I can lead that team to what's coming next.
Rob, I'm thinking of some of the details now, and it suddenly popped into my mind that the Boston Marathon ran out of finishers' medals last April. I hope you've got somebody working double time on that one.
Oh yeah, we're good on that. Yeah, we got a whole department, and we actually revealed the medal on social media just the other day for this year's TCS New York City Marathon. And it's beautiful. It's a great looking medal, circle, beautiful, engraved. And the feedback on it on social media was through the roof. People are thrilled about the medal. So don't worry, you get to that finish line, you're getting a medal.
Medals are really a big deal these days, but I don't know. There are more serious parts to the job. You're running a modest-sized corporation, a nonprofit to be sure, but there's a lot of stuff you've got to be in the middle of, and a lot of people and departments you're working with. I'm curious, who do you end up spending the most time with? Not the people, but the departments that really require heavyweight lifting.
It is you said it, a modest-sized corporation. We have 250 almost full-time employees at Roadrunners. We are at about $100 million a year annually in revenue. So that's not a small operation. And that question is a tough one, to be honest, Amby. I spread myself pretty equally around the groups. We've got our events team, we've got our commercial team and the sponsorship side of things, runner services, our community impact team, where we're going out in the community and, making an impact. I spend a lot of time with all those groups. I've probably been spending a little more time than one might expect with like our internal strategy group this year, because we are embarking on a long-term strategic plan for what we want the future of Roadrunners to be in 3 to 5 years. And so that's something that we kicked off with an offsite with our team back in May. And so that's been a big project this year. And then obviously the events team. I mean, I spend a ton of time with them because that's what we do week in and week out. And I go to those races 80% of the time. I'll show up at sometimes, I'll surprise the team and show up at 3 a.m, but usually I'm showing up at 6 or 7. The races start at 8.
And you've been running a lot of them yourself.
I have. I've been running,
We'll
which has
get
been
to that.
fantastic. Yeah, I love that. They let me run. They'll give me a bib last minute and let me jump in there, which is a lot of fun. So I'd say, in terms of hours, it's probably the events team, but a lot of that is because I'm at the events, and that's one of my favorite parts of the job.
So, Rob, the New York Roadrunners is at heart a local organization, but with a clear global impact in hosting races, events around the city, and almost, every weekend, as you just said. How important is the TCS New York City Marathon to the organization's overall impact and health?
Extremely important. And George, I'm going to embarrass you a little. It's because of people like you and your contemporaries, from Fred LeBeau to all the race directors
Ted
through the
Corbett,
years.
yeah.
Ted Corbett. Absolutely. And then, of course, folks like Alan Steinfeld, Mary Wittenberg, who have grown this, year after year and decade after decade, have gotten it to be a true global tentpole event. One of the biggest events of the year in the sport of running. And of course, I say biased, the best day of the year in New York City, right? So it's a huge deal for the organization, just in terms of what it does for us in terms of our mission, but also, the economics of it. I mean, a significant amount of the economics of our operation here are driven either directly or indirectly by the marathon. 50,000 runners, that's a big part of it. Most of our sponsors, George, this, are coming to us, and they'll activate with us all through the year. We'll have MasterCard doing the mini 10K, or we'll have United Airlines, of course, does the New York City half. So we have sponsors for events all year, but all of them activate around the marathon. They all want to be part of that day. And so that's the thing that drives so much of what we do. And then, of course, we have the 9+1 program, which New Yorkers are all familiar with, where if you run 9 of our events and volunteer at 1 over the course of a calendar year, you get guaranteed entry into the next year's marathon. And that drives so much interest in running our weekly races week in and week out. So it's so much of it is tied to the marathon. It's actually one of the things, George and Amby, that I do want to actually see if we can diversify away from a little bit with the organization. I joke around when I first took this job, and still today, people will find that I'm CEO of New York Roadrunners, and they'll look at me like, oh, is that the marathon? I'm like, yeah, that's the marathon. We put on the marathon. And then my favorite question they'll ask me is that a full-time job? Like, what do you do after the marathon's over? Do you do you keep working or do you take 6 months off? And so there's not as much understanding as I would like there to be about the fact that we are doing things all year long, and it's not just the marathon. And so I think that's a challenge.
Particularly in the community and with the kids. I mean, all of that, right?
100%. And, listen, people are busy. They if they're not super deep into the running community, they may not know about all of that. So doing a better job of telling the story of what New York Roadrunners does all year long, that's a huge part of my set of priorities here.
That's a great goal, Rob. So this podcast is called Running State of the Sport. And we're going to ask you, especially it's interesting, you've got an extensive sports background across a variety of sports. When you look at running and marathoning in the city, the states, around the globe, what's your estimate of the state of the sport? What's really hitting it out of the park? What's doing well? And what could be done better?
Yeah, Amby, it's a great question. I think that the state of the sport is incredibly healthy. It's in really good shape. And what's driving it is the regular runner. What's driving it is the desire that people have to have that experience and check those kind of bucket list items, whether it's running the TCS New York City Marathon or getting the Abbott World Marathon Major 6-star medal, which is becoming increasingly a big deal for a lot of runners. It's those achievements that are driving it, or getting a PR in the marathon or a half marathon or whatever. That's really what's driving the sport. And I think that, listen, our races are sold out week in and week out. There's barely been a race since I've been here, George knows this, that has not been sold out. And I think a lot of it is driven by what happened during the pandemic. So many people took up running during the pandemic. There wasn't anything else to do. I have been a runner my whole life, but I put in more miles in 2020 than I had done in many, many years because there was nowhere else to go, nothing else to do. And people have stayed with it, and they're now translating that habit they formed then into doing more now in terms of races and things like that. So the state of the sport is really, really good. Where I think it could be better is in terms of the star power of the best in the world. We certainly have some stars. Eliud Kipchoge is a star, and now we've got Kelvin Kiptum, who's just becoming a big star. But they're not anywhere at the level of some of the stars you see, certainly in professional sports, right? In the world where I came from at ESPN or NBC Sports, or even, frankly, Olympic sports, the 100-meter dash champion, that's a big name. Those are some of the biggest stars in the world. And I think marathoners are getting there and we're seeing improvement, but I'd like to see, a Bolt, a Usain Bolt type figure in the sport of longer distance running. We're not there. I think it's lots of reasons why for that. Some of it is maybe the nature of some of the long distance runners, they're not the flashiest a lot of the time in terms of their personalities, right? And part of it is just, I think we can do a better job as an industry in marketing and telling stories about these people, men and women.
And also, Rob, we've had Nadal and Federer and Djokovic for, all these years. And we see these great runners come and go, with the exception certainly of Eliud Kipchoge, and maybe now we're beginning to see the Kiptum era. But there's too many. There's been a great turnover here, and you do need, you need durability so the public can begin to, kind of get to know who these people are. I think that's a factor. I mean, there's just a new champion here and a new one there, and it just keeps moving in that direction.
Absolutely. And so I'd like to have a hard time walking down Fifth Avenue with one of these runners without them being stopped and mobbed for autographs and things like that. And it's, we're not there. I think a guy like Kipchoge, certainly people are going to recognize him, but not the way they're going to recognize Usain Bolt or LeBron James or
Serena
Williams.
Knows.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yep.
So I think we can do better there. And media and storytelling is such a big part of that. If you look at something like what Formula One did with Drive to Survive and creating those stories that even if you don't run or you're not that interested in the sport, you're interested in the story and the people. That's where I think we can all do better to tell those stories.
Rob, I want to thank you for answering that question, because we've had a few other people who more or less ducked the what could be improved part because, it's uncomfortable and who wants to say anything that sounds even the least little bit negative. But you answered fully and in a positive vein. So thank you for that.
So, Rob, you and I are both sports fans. We started bonding on this when we got to know each other more than a year ago. And you've done commentary on the Tennis Channel. I know you're a big fan of virtually all sports. So let's confide a little bit here. What's your favorite sport? And do you have some all-time favorite athlete?
Well, I'm going to be honest, because that's what I do. As much as I love running, the sports that I grew up most with, both as an athlete and as a fan, even though I did run as a in high school and cross country and things like that, but baseball and tennis really are the two. And George, you and I have had many a conversation about baseball. I grew up in New York, and my dad lived in Harlem and was a big New York Giants fan. He was a Willie Mays guy and went to the Polo Grounds and all of that. Of course, the Giants left for San Francisco, so he passed his hatred of the Yankees down to me and made me a Mets fan. So I'm a giant Mets fan. And, that was great in 1986. Been a while. It's been a little rough go since then, but we're always keeping the faith. So I love baseball, and I played baseball in high school and a little bit in college. So that was always my number one sport as an athlete too. And I got my daughter playing softball as well. And then the other is tennis. And I love tennis. I've played tennis most of my life, never played in school because I was always playing baseball same season. But I've loved tennis. My family's had, US Open tickets to when I was 9 years old. I saw Borg and McEnroe and Stefan Edberg and Agassi, Sampras. I saw them all, and then that chance I had to work actually at Tennis Channel for a couple of years before I came here to Roadrunners was so fantastic because I got a chance to work alongside people like Tracy Austin and Andy Roddick and Jim Courier and some of these great athletes who I admired so much from afar. So I do love tennis. I think there's a lot of tennis fans who are runners and vice versa. There's a nice crossover there.
So, Rob, your dad, like me, grew up as a Willie Mays fan, and I just loved Willie Mays, except he didn't do something I did. I named one of my sons Willie after Willie Mays. So why aren't you Willie Simmelkjaer? I'm gonna get on your dad about that. But.
Yeah. Well, he just named me after himself. So he just went that route. I'm Junior. So I took that route. Yeah. But I did name a dog. One of my two dogs is named Mookie. So I did that. Okay. And people always ask me if it's Mookie Betts. And I'm like, no. You don't know me. It's Mookie Wilson. Absolutely.
Mookie Wilson, absolutely.
From the 86 Mets. And I always wore number one when I was playing baseball. So yeah, Mookie was my guy. Mookie will always be my guy.
Well, fortunately, Rob, there's no rule that says that you can't be a baseball and tennis fan and a running enthusiast at the same time. In fact, they probably all help each other in your performance and health and fitness. You talked a little earlier about enjoying your job at New York Roadrunners. What's the absolute best part of it? What's just really too much fun for any of the rest of us to believe?
Yeah, the best part for me, it's actually a really easy answer, is hanging out at the finish line of our races. I just love it. I show up and I'll usually give a little speech at the beginning of a race, and I always end the speech the same way. I'll see you at the finish line. And then depending on whether I run that day or not, if I run, I'll see the folks at the finish line who I was able to outrun. If I don't run, I just zip right over there, and then I get to see the really fast runners come in. So that's fun too. But I just love the finish line, and it gets better as the race goes on and gets later, to be honest, because the runners who are more towards the back of the pack, they appreciate even more when I hang out or other senior members of our team hang out to give them a high five, congratulate them on finishing the race. And it just gets more and more fun as the day goes on to see these folks come across the finish line. It's just such a great feeling. We all know the finish line of a race, especially a big race, is one of the best places on earth. You know, everybody feels great. Maybe they're a little out of breath. Maybe they're feeling like they need to, you know, get a minute. But I give out a lot of sweaty high fives and fist bumps. I bring a lot of hand sanitizer. But it's great. I love it. And it's by far the most fun part of my job.
So you mentioned running some cross country in school and so on. You've run, and I know this, 2 marathons, both in New York. And I think you did a 3:44 when you were in your 20s, and then you came back. I can't remember exactly how old you were, but you ran like a 3:28 some years later. And I know, gosh, it was just a few weeks ago, you ran the Staten Island Half in 1:39. I mean, it strikes me that you're in pretty darn good shape here. How much are you running these days? And, you know, with a job as busy as yours, how are you fitting it in?
Thank you, first of all. I feel pretty good. You know, as you know, George, I was thinking about running the Chicago Marathon this year. And I started putting on more and more miles to try to build up for that. And my knee in June, July just wasn't having it. And so I pulled away from that, took some rest, came back, and now I'm feeling great. So it was a nice bounce back. And, you know, the distances I love, George, I love the 5K is good. 10K is probably my favorite distance because I feel like I can run with some speed there. But the endurance I still get rewarded for. And then up to the half marathon, which is a great distance too. And I'm running like 3 days a week. You know, I'm in the city with a job all the time. I have a little place blocked from Central Park. So I'll get up and run at least 2-3 days a week. I love it when I can sneak into one of our races. It's so much fun. Running's just been a part of my life throughout. You know, from the time I ran cross country up in the Bronx at Horseman, I ran in Van Cortlandt Park, one of the great tracks in the world for cross country. So I had a great place to get acquainted with that sport. And, you know, my daughter's running cross country now in high school. She ran her first varsity race this week. So
how did that go? This was Julie.
Julia, yeah. She ran her very first cross country race. She ran it in 22:45. And that's a huge improvement from she ran with me in the Abbott Dash the day before the marathon last year.
I remember that, yeah.
And, you know, I was pacing her, and we battled to get, I think, under maybe 29 minutes. So she's like 7 minutes faster in less than a year, which is pretty good. She's still pretty new to competitive running, so I think she's got a lot of upside still. But it's just, listen, it's a sport for a lifetime. That's the number one thing, guys, is you pick this sport up at whatever age that you're fortunate enough to pick it up, and it's always there. You know, you don't need a team. You don't need a place or a court or a membership or any of that. You can get those things if you want them. But if you just want to throw on the shoes because you got a half hour to kill and you just need to get your heart rate up, it's always there for you no matter where you are. That's the best thing about it. It's very easy to stay in the sport.
So, Rob, I'm going to ask you a slightly tough question. Apologies in advance. There are some other folks who are head of big running organizations who happen to be super fast when they were athletes in their prime. I'm thinking of Seb Coe, Kerry Pinkowski, Rich Kenna, and there are others. You've obviously been a runner all your life and a sports athlete all your life. But what makes you the right guy to be at the New York Roadrunners now? And what was your elevator pitch when you were doing interviews?
George, I don't know. What did I say? What convinced you guys to?
Yeah, I remembered a lot about those interviews. You said an awful lot of things, and about your running. I think one of the things is you didn't overstate it, which I think we appreciated. We liked the fact that you'd run the marathon and you'd run it a couple of times and you ran it in a very respectable time indeed. But you weren't presenting yourself as Mr. Running. And
No.
I think that was important. But yet you had this incredible sports background. And why don't you tell us a little bit about it? I mean, your background is awfully interesting. You mentioned going to Horace Mann here in the Bronx, and then you went to Dartmouth and Harvard Law School, but you've also been at NBC Sports, ESPN.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about, what you did there, maybe even what was your favorite job.
Yeah, I mean, and by the way, Amby, I'm not going to dodge your question. It's a good question. And, I think the answer is, and then I'll go into some of the stuff George was talking about. The answer is that I actually think someone like me is really reflective of the people that we serve at Roadrunners. I think I am very much a prototype, probably even, frankly, I'm probably I'm on the more serious side, frankly, in terms of
That's right.
how fast I run and how seriously I take running, in terms of being representative of our runners for the most part. I think our average runner, our norm, sort of the prototype of a runner at Roadrunners is running for the experience of running and not for the time, and that to me is really important to have that mindset when it comes to thinking about how we can achieve our mission, which is, our mission is to help and inspire people through running. It's not to make people faster. It's not to, win lots of races or medals. It's to make people's lives better through running. And I think that, in a lot of ways, I'm, very much in that vein, if you will. And then as far as the other stuff goes, yeah, I think what attracted me to the job and what, hopefully attracted the board to me is the experience I had in the sports industry, and people asked me a couple of times, oh, you haven't been in the running industry, is this going to be new for you? And I don't really see it so much as a running industry. I know that there are brands and there are things that are specific to running, but I see it as a sort of the running vertical of the sports industry at the end of the day. And I think I can bring a lot of what I learned when places like ESPN, where I worked for 10 years. My first job at ESPN was to manage the NBA relationship. I came in, helped them close the first deal they had to broadcast the NBA on ESPN, and got to really learn how the industry works, from the media point of view, sponsorship and the marketing and all of that. And I had a chance to do that at 10 years. I had some incredible mentors. I worked for a guy named George Bodenheimer, who was the president of ESPN, and I was his chief of staff for several years, and really got to sit at the foot of one of the great leaders in the industry and learn everything I could possibly know about this industry. And then went on to NBC Sports and had a chance to help launch businesses, acquire businesses. So there was so much there that I was able to learn through those experiences. And, I've been able to bring all that here, and I have felt really good about it so far. I find I'm drawing on things I learned in those 20 years at ESPN and NBC Sports pretty much every day here. So it's been, for me so far, at least, knock on wood, a really good fit so far.
So, Amby, let me follow up one more with Rob, because now I'm thinking back at those early interviews that you had with the board. One of the things that got our attention, certainly mine, was you spoke about the importance of the connection of mental health to running. And I know you've been championing this since you've been the CEO. Tell us a little bit what you meant by that and what you've been doing, and even further what you see the organization to do in that space.
Yeah, thanks, George. And it is something that I have talked about pretty much since day one here. If you're a runner, and whether you run a mile or 5K or you've run 50 marathons, how it makes you feel, not just physically, but the mental relief and the clarity that we get from running. It's It's a stress relief. It is, they call them endorphins, the runner's high, whatever you want to call it. There is a true impact that running can have on our mental well-being. And I feel that now is a really important time to talk about this, because we know what the city of New York, what the country at large and the world are going through in terms of the mental health lasting impact that the pandemic had, the level of isolation that people had, the ongoing impact of social media on kids, events that are happening in the world. Like there's just a lot of strain on people, and this is something that I think is a huge reason to run. And at the end of the day, I think that's really our job at Roadrunners, is to give people reasons to run. And if you haven't done it, you may not realize how powerful running can be to that improvement of your mental health. People call it, free therapy, right? It's not therapy. It's not medication. People may need real mental health intervention in a lot of cases, but it can really make a difference. And, there's a woman named Allison Mariella Desir, who you guys may know. If you haven't had her on the podcast, you should have her on sometime. She wrote a great book called Running While Black. And her story really starts with, she was suffering from depression, and someone got her into running, and it transformed her life. So, and I've met many, many people like that in the year I've been here. So, I go around evangelizing this because it's a reason to run. And to me, it's a prime example of how we can help and inspire people through running.
Rob, you and Meb Kefalevsky have a great podcast of your own, Set the Pace.
Set the Pace, yeah.
George and I are both avid and appreciative listeners. I'm curious, why did you start that? Will it continue beyond the marathon? And, how's it been?
It has been so much fun. I started it because I really wanted New York Roadrunners to have a new way of connecting to our runners, to our community. We have so many great stories to tell. The TCS New York City Marathon, 50,000 stories show up at the starting line. And I believe if you could really dive into all of them, you'd probably have a good 200 feature films that would be Hollywood quality stories about people who run the marathon. And I just thought, gosh, we got to be able to tell one of these a week. If Meb and I can just get the right folks in front of us and tell those stories, it's really fits in beautifully with what we want to do, inspire people to run or to keep running. We figured the timing would be good. We launched it around Labor Day, and we knew people would be doing their long runs leading up to a marathon. And so we positioned it as something to do while you're putting in your, long weekend run. And I've heard a lot of people say they've been doing just that, which is fantastic. So I've had a great time doing it with Meb. Meb and I are kind of the perfect combination for a podcast. I've got the broadcasting experience. Meb's got the running experience and the expertise, and he's, let's face it, like a god in the running industry. So, I read the ads and Meb asks the good questions. But
no, it's been terrific. It's really been good. I'm enjoying it completely.
Thank you, guys.
I know a lot of people are. I think we're nearing the end. I'm sorry to say it, but boy, the time's flying by, and we want to give you a sort of a fairy godmother question here. You get 3 wishes, let's say, for the weekend of the TCS New York City Marathon. And what would they be, Rob?
2 are easy. A high of 55, no rain, and safe. Safe for everyone. A safe day. That's it. If we get those 3 things, good weather and a safe day, we'll be happy. And I think we will, because we got a great team. We got a team that is the best in the business. We got a great partnership with so many agencies in the city of New York who help us shut down the greatest city in the world for a day and make this thing happen and bring people out into the streets for a giant celebration. And so we know it's going to be a great day. Can't wait to see everybody there. And Amby and George, I really appreciate you guys having me on. Congrats on doing this. It's great. I think it's really great for the sport to have the two of you, having these conversations about it. And I look forward to continuing to listen.
Well, Rob, I now know your name, Simmelkjaer. It's been great having you with us. And you've really given us some great insights into the organization, the race itself, the community that you're building and extending there. And thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Amby, that was a great conversation with Rob Simmelkjaer. And what did you find most interesting among his comments?
Well, I was interested in and very impressed by the fact that at age 51, he's as fit right now as he was 10 years ago, which was the last time he ran the marathon. In fact, he recently ran the Staten Island half marathon in 1:39, which is a really good time. And it came the day after he ran the 5K at the Chicago Marathon in 20 minutes and something. So the guy is keeping himself very fit. And heck, I got to admit, I like that in a runner, race director, or anyone else involved in the sport. And also, I really appreciated when we threw him the fairy godmother question at the end. What 3 wishes would you like for the New York City Marathon? He right away said that he wanted the temperature to be 55 degrees. He was on the scene last year. He wasn't the CEO yet, but he was there, and he saw that a hot day in New York, as the race had last year, is not a good one for the runners. Frankly, it's not good for organizers, medical teams, or anyone. So he would love to see 55 degrees, which would be great. And of course, he said that he's hoping for a very safe marathon. What were your thoughts about Rob's comments?
Yeah, at the top of our podcast, we mentioned that he's already recognized for his communication skills. And I think we had real evidence of it today. He's a great storyteller. And I think it's easy to see why he's such a excellent voice for the New York Road Runners. What I took from all of what he said, the one I think that really resonated the most with me is when we asked him about the highlight of his job. I mean, this is a complex job. He said it was being at the finish line of the races, and particularly the marathon. And not just there to high five the elites when they cross, but he said he really enjoys the day as it goes on, as the, mid-packers and the rank and file come through. And that's a great message from someone leading an organization this large.
I thought it was great as well, George. And I think it's a real testimony to who he is as a race director and a human being, and someone who can relate to all the runners who are out there, even those who spend a large part of their day at the New York City Marathon. And that's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with our next episode, which, as George noted, will be with Patty Catalano, the new Bibi Bikila honoree at the New York City Marathon. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving, onward.